Hello and welcome to Succinct and Substantial. I'm Lil, and I am so glad that you are here with me today, Shae Krispinsky. Welcome.
Hi.
Shae, I'm so glad that you're here and that we have the opportunity to have a conversation today. I'd like to start off by introducing people to your Instagram, Dear Wassily, and I have a couple of questions about that, but we'll get to that. The way that you describe yourself on your Instagram account is books, trees, music, obsessions, and other beautiful failures. And I'd love to talk about all of those. And you finish up by saying a living, janky archive, which I absolutely love. So that leads me to my first question, which is what do you mean when you describe your creative work as janky?
So I've sort of taken over or reclaimed the word janky because it typically has connotations of, like being busted up or old or, kind of decrepit. And I've reclaimed it to mean work or an act or, something that you do with your whole heart, full of heartful intention, something that you do out of the love and joy of doing it with no goal toward it being good or successful, where, in a kind of like a market sense or like an external sense, it's purely doing something for your own self and, putting in an honest effort, putting in hard work, and time, but the goal itself is the doing rather than the product. And so that's what I call janky. I take it as like an empowering term where it's like, I'm doing this for me. And even if someone else thinks it's a failure, I know for me, it's not. It's not trying to be perfect. It's just trying to be, the process of creating.
I think that's a really lovely way of looking at it. I mean, and reclaiming the word janky, which I believe has roots in the word junk and stuff that we tend to throw away or discard or not treat very well. I
Mhm.
also love that you have titled your Instagram account a living janky archive, and a living archive, is the bookends to that. I feel like Instagram has it's a strong tool that way. There are a lot of other things that we can say about that platform. Um,
Sure.
but that visual medium, I think, and I love following the stuff that you put out on Instagram because you do have all of these wonderful obsessions that you share with people. You
Mhm.
are a musician, you're a novelist, you're a poet, and you're a performer in a lot of different ways. And I feel like the stuff that you put out on Instagram are really lovely snippets of that, and creating that beautiful archive of just your life as you're experiencing it and sharing with people. So thank you for doing that. It's,
Thank
I
you
feel
for
like that's
looking
a
at it. Yeah.
it's an act of generosity. And I definitely have my favorites of your pieces. And one of my favorite performances that you've ever done is the video shower beers.
Oh, well, thank
I
you.
really enjoy that. I love everything about the atmosphere, the way that you recorded it, the feeling around it. And so I'd love to hone in for just a little bit. And if you can, and I will share a link to the video in the show notes so that anybody who is listening to our conversation or watching it will be able to check out the video afterward because it's wonderful. And I'd love if you could just sort of do a deep dive for us on that particular video, your intention as an artist. What do you want us to get out of it as your audience for it, and any other thoughts you have?
Yeah. Well, I don't know, you know, I conceived of shower beers as a project, and I call it janky dance pop. Um, when I was in a very dark place, dealing with a lot of depression and things like that. And it was always on the back of my mind, and it was something that I conceived of almost being like my swan song, my goodbye. Um, but then, over the time that I was dealing with this very deep depression, I sought help. I got the medication, and, I was accurately diagnosed for the first time in my life. And my life just changed dramatically. I feel like my life started. And one of the things about depression is you do have these ideas, but you have no motivation. So now that I'm in a lot better of a place, I have a lot more energy, motivation, mental space. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do this project, but instead of it being a swan song, it's sort of like a like I survived, and it's a celebration of that. And so, Shower Beers, the song Feel Something, that's the one for the video. It's about dealing with that, that long journey of depression. And I wanted it to have that sort of dichotomy where the song itself is kind of bleak, but then it's a very joyful sounding song, and the video is kind of lighthearted and funny and kind of, just out there a little bit. And so because I wanted to show that, you can go through these dark things, but it, you know, hopefully it's not forever. I know people have their struggles and everyone's struggles different. But for me, I thought it was going to be forever and it wasn't. And so I wanted to bring in a lot of light and glitter and color, um, to kind of show like, yeah, that was me then, but this is me now. But both of those are real and both of those are part of me.
I really appreciate your sharing all of the background about that and the creative process of bringing it to being and diving into this issue of depression. And I'm delighted that you came out of the other side of that having created beautiful art. And I think this process of alchemizing your experience is at the heart of a lot of the conversations that I've had with people about their creative work
Yeah.
is this process of alchemizing the pain that you're suffering, regardless of what that particular flavor of it is. In your case, it was depression, and I appreciate your sharing that experience. There has been historically in our culture a taboo on talking about mental health issues, and this feels like a breakthrough. Like the work that so many creative people and artists are doing now that are working very specifically on exercising their own demons. And this has always been true. Artistic people always use this, but it is refreshing to see this moment of all of us starting to recognize that mental health is a really important thing to pay attention to. And now we have these ways of connecting with each other that no are not a replacement for being in person. I look forward to us being in person again at some point. It's really great to be able to use this particular technology to do that. And I love the magic of this sufficiently advanced technology to be akin to magic where we can share that. So thank you for sharing your experience here on the show, and then also your experience of then creating something beautiful for other people to experience with the video of Shower Beers.
Yeah.
I've watched it several times myself and have really appreciated everything that you put into it. And there is a lot that goes into creative projects. And I think people who don't necessarily have a creative life in that sense may not have um, a window into what that experience is like and how it can be really challenging when you are blocked in some kind of way, when you have some sort of obstacle. Can you talk about what do you feel and what do you do when you feel blocked? Like what are your ways of bypassing those obstacles or finding ways around them or dissolving them?
I have found in my life, obviously, depression can be a huge block, and that's something that, you can't just snap out of. And if you're in it for a long enough period, you have to work within it. But it wasn't until I feel like I got outside of that a bit that I recognized that for me, at least, when I'm blocked, it's because I'm either trying to do too much or I'm not working on the right project for that time. And so I have found that creative projects and creative work have their cycles in my life. And, I used to think that I have to do everything all at once. Or, I need to be working on my music and my writing and my photography and my poetry and all of this stuff at the same time. And that just made me so scattered that I never accomplished anything. Whereas now I understand, okay, I might get 4 projects, 3 or 4 projects done in a year, but I'm going to dedicate 3 or 4 months to one project, see it through to completion, and then I move on. And I have to listen to myself and trust myself to know, well, maybe my plan for the next 4 months was, working on my novel, but now, my life has shown itself to be one of the goals that I have for this year that I'm currently working on is doing a stand-up comedy routine. So now I'm taking improv classes and things like that, which 3 months ago I never would have expected myself to be doing. But so it's just trusting myself and the universe to bring me what I need at the time. And when I do that, I find myself to be less blocked because I'm flowing.
That's one of my favorite words is flow. As a
Yeah.
yoga teacher, obviously, that the whole idea of flow, I think, is mm, it's life itself. And I think that seems to be one of the things you're honing in on, right? Is tapping into this is something that I struggle with sometimes because I love to be able to say that I can trust my intuition and trust my instinct. How do we differentiate between that instinct and intuition and impulse? And how do we get right?
Mhm.
This is one of the things that like, oh, I just like I'm going to take care of this project. So like what for you feels like the difference between intuition, inspiration, and impulse?
Sometimes they're the same thing. I think what I use to guide myself in terms of what is right for me is just how it feels, and you can have an impulsive thought that feels right. That's kind of what the comedy thing was for me. I was just like, I can do this. Why can't I do this? I'm going to do this, and again, it's janky. So my goal isn't to do comedy well. My goal is to do it like a 5-minute routine at an open mic, you know, and which was kind of impulsive, but now that I like that felt good to attempt. So now, you know, I'm working in that and putting effort toward it, and it continues to feel good, you know. Um, and so, is it impulse or is it, buried intuition that maybe was percolating in the subconscious? And when it kindly burst forth, it's like, wow, that's an impulse. Where did that come from? But, it could have been under the surface for weeks, months, years.
Mm,
So I don't know. I think maybe an impulse is like a true impulse might be something that you just don't follow up with.
mm. That's a really good point. Impulses sometimes tend to just sort of fizzle out, whereas something that is that, as you say, where it's been sort of covered up or buried or in the back here, and then all of a sudden it emerges forward. Um, awesome. Well, I appreciate your answering that because that is something that's sort of been percolating in the back of my mind is how do I differentiate between in my own creative projects, like what, but being driven to just try something out, which it sounds like during the comedy bit might have been something like, oh, yeah, maybe I can't just like, roll the dice and seeing how it goes and it not, and I really love that the overarching theme of how you're approaching this is that perfection is not the goal, and an end product that you're looking to sell or commodify isn't the goal, that it is actually the creative process itself. Now, that to me sounds like, in some ways, a spiritual and emotional health hygiene thing for you as well. Can you speak? Do you want to share any thoughts about that process?
Yeah, I was raised in a religious household, and in my teen years, I realized and recognized that some of the values and the things that, I was being told didn't align with the people's actions who were telling me those things. And so I sort of distanced myself from that upbringing. But since then, I've been searching for so long to try to find something to replace it because I wanted to feel connected to something bigger than myself, and I do think there are so many mysteries out there, and, there are ways to kind of tap into that while also accepting that you might not ever have the answer. And so, I tried all of these different, spiritual cloaks on and things like that. And it wasn't until I had that moment where I was like, creativity is my spirituality. That's how I feel connected to something bigger. That's how I kind of like probe these bigger questions, that again, I don't have the answers to, but sometimes that spiritual process is just finding questions to ask, and even if you're searching for answers and you don't find them, again, it's like that practice, it's that process that means so much more than an answer. And so once I realized that, then it's like, oh, actually, I do have a spirituality. I am a spiritual person. It just might not look like what this grander idea of spirituality is. I'm not, going to a temple or, I'm not, um, you know, practicing spells or anything like that per se. I feel like creativity is a spell, but so that's I find them very interwoven in my life.
It sounds like you might be also getting at that your pursuit is not attached to dogma and the absorption of dogma, which is a lot of what we experience in religious faiths, established religious faiths. And I was also in a very religious upbringing, not so much in the family, but in my schooling. And it was an interesting mix of, very, very much indoctrination at the school and at the church level, but within my family, a bunch of rowdy free thinkers. So um, I tended to be a rowdy freethinker who was also very much interested in spiritual matters and ceremony. And
Mhm.
that was one of the things that I really appreciated about that. And I find the same level of not ceremony in particular, the same way that you might practice a religious ceremony, but the process of doing any creative endeavor does involve a certain amount of ceremony, particularly if it's a performance. What is and maybe you've been working around to this anyway, but let me just ask in words, what do you think the ultimate message of your work is, and what do you want people to take from it?
What I tell this to people all the time. People, they come to me and say, "Well, I'm not creative. I'm not creative." Because there's a very narrow concept of creativity, I think, in our society, which is, musician, painter, things like that, where I say everyone is creative, and it can be for anything. I think creativity is basically synthesizing different ideas into something new. And you could do that, fixing a car, you could do that, making a spreadsheet. And so I would love people to, communicate or see my work and think, well, I could do that, like it's not great, like anyone could do that. And I'm like, yes, anyone could and everyone should, because creativity I find is so
Yes.
interesting. Yeah. And so that's what I would like people like do it. Just do it, like that's what I would like people to know and that, it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be janky, and that is still valid. Um,
I I love everything about what you're saying. As much as I love to go to museums and go to beautiful galleries and see works that are in perfect lighting scenarios and that are, protected and all of that and that whole experience, the wide spectrum of what people can create and then share with other people doesn't have to be that. That it can also be this thing that drives community as part of that process, right? And I feel like that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the art that you put out, the creative things that you put out are both things that can be enjoyed In a solitary setting, I can watch your video, Shower Beers, right? I can read your poetry, I can read your novel. And in some ways, those activities are the author A.S. Byatt wrote this in the novel Possession. The writer writes alone and the reader reads alone. And so they are alone together. And I've always loved that because I think it really gets to the heart of that when the creative process is something that you can share across time and space with one other person. And then there's this ability to share whatever it is that you're creating out in community, right? Where you perform music, right? Yes, Shower Beers as a video is great, but also like going to your shows and seeing you perform live has its own special, very deeply moving experience. And I think all of it is really necessary for our survival, not just for us to thrive, but
Yeah.
for us to actually survive as a species. And I'm really grateful that that is something that you have decided is worth your time to do. Um, I'm curious, I've always suspected, but if you will confirm for us here and now, is your Instagram channel named Dear Wassily for Wassily Kandinsky by
It
any
is.
chance?
It
Oh,
is. I used to so I had a Tumblr and it was called Letters to Vasily. And I just named it that because in college and stuff like that, in my journals, I would just write letters to him. I would write letters to Tristan Zara, who was a Dadaist poet, and things like that. And it was just kind of my way to feel like, I was again like having a conversation with people's work that I appreciated or maybe didn't understand fully. I think there's a lot to unpack in both of those people's work. And so, Dear Vasily was just, a nod to that. And it's just, yeah, I've used it as my online, you know, persona or name or whatever username for a long time now.
I love that.
Yeah.
Do you have any particular fandom for Kandinsky? The reason that I ask is that Kandinsky is one of my favorite artists ever, like tip top of the list. Like whenever I encounter a Kandinsky, I feel blessed, from the beyond. Do you have any particular connection with Kandinsky, or was it just because you had that great experience of the having a Tumblr with
Yeah, I mean,
letters?
what I liked about him, his art is he kind of broke things apart, right? Um,
Yes.
and so again, it was, that connection where, oh, like you don't have to follow the rules. You can create your own rules or you can go based off of your feeling or your spirituality. I think his work is very spiritual, and so it's just kind of like it can be different, you can take your own path. And that's what I really connected with,
Mm.
that idea.
One of the things that I really appreciate about his art too is his use of color and
Mm.
line in that way. For anybody who is watching this video in the conversation that we're having, or listening to this on the podcast, and you have not actually seen any of Kandinsky's work, Kandinsky. Check it out. It is definitely worth seeing what we're talking about here. And where he sort of exists in time and space too as an artist, I think is really fascinating. That's one of the most fascinating periods of modern art for me. Love going to modern art museums, specifically in the hopes that I might see a Kandinsky or one of his fellow artists. Um, so let me, speaking of art and putting it out there, what are you working on? Do you want to give us a little preview of what you're working on, what you're planning on putting out next?
Right. So my current thing that I'm sort of working on is, I started taking improv for my comedy goal. But that I do see that as being something I work on a little bit over the year because it's something that I've never done and it's not something I know a lot about. And so that's a project that I don't see as just being a dedicated 3 or 4 months. I have a performance scheduled at Jeremy Gloff's Sound Salon in December. So, But the thing that I'm working on mostly now is in shower beers. I started learning how to produce using Logic, and I really like that process of creating tracks and things like that. And so Jeremy Gloff, who you interviewed, so people will hear and know of him. We're going to start working on a project together where, I make the tracks and then, either he does the lyrics and melody or we do it together. So that's one of the things that's I'm working on like dedicated right now. But another goal that I have sort of after I get this kind of, you know, under my belt, then I do want to finish. I have a novel in progress that I'm working on, and I want to get my shitty first draft done. So those are the things that I have on my plate for this year. I mean, as of right now, like I said, that could change, but
Oh, well, all of that sounds fantastic. Is there, before we start to wrap up our conversation, I want to make sure that people who are listening or watching are able to continue following what you're doing. Is there a place where they should visit in particular?
if people do go to my Instagram, which again, it's Dear Vasily, then they can, I post little clips and things here. And if I'm playing a show, then I'll post like the flyer or whatever. But I do also have a link tree in my bio. And
Okay.
in that, you can find links to, my novel. You can find links to, um, you know, shower beers. I have a song out on Spotify. I'm sure I have a link to the video. I have a link to I'm another project of mine is a band, Navin Avenue. I have a link to that, so you can go to the Spotify. Um, I have I think the link tree is probably the best place because I have stories up there, I have poems, I have my music, anything that is something that like a dedicated thing that I want to share, I usually put up there. But yeah, I mean, follow me on Instagram. I'll follow you back, and you'll get some of the janky mess.
The Living Janky Archive.
Yeah,
Awesome.
exactly.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. So let's end on a big note here. What is the most profound lesson that you've learned in your creative life to date?
Okay.
I'm going to say
Um,
to date because I'm hoping that we can come back and have more conversations about this. So maybe you and Jeremy can come on together and we can talk
oh,
about
that
that
would be
project a
great.
little. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the most profound lesson from your creative life?
So I think this is cheating, but I have two. And the first one is that sort of trusting that things come in cycles and not to force them. Um, and then the second one is that I believe you can't think your way into a solution. So if you are feeling stuck or if you don't know where a song should go or a story should go, like sitting there and like racking your brain or brainstorming like in your head or th something like that does not work. You have to be working, like sit down
Mm,
with your guitar, sit down at the piano, sit down with your notebook and pen or your computer or whatever. And even if it's garbage, even if it's not something that you use, that process, that active process, that active working, the the answer or, the way you need to go, that'll arrive from that. So,
hmm
get out of your head, start doing, make the movements toward where you want to be, and that's how you'll get there because you can think yourself into, a spiral that you never get out of. So those are the two main things. And those are the two things that, I wish I had learned far earlier. And, I hope other people learn them sooner than I did.
Well, thank you for sharing them here. It's really excellent advice for all of us. And I'm very glad that that was something that you picked up for yourself along the way and were
Yeah.
willing to share it today.
Yeah.
Shae, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure to
Thank
listen
you.
to you talk about your creative process and all of the things that you're up to. I will make sure to put your Instagram account and link tree in the show notes. I will be reaching out to you to Hang on a second. All right. So I will follow up with you so that we can take care of all the post-production stuff. And in the meantime, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to the conversation between me and Shae. And stay tuned if there are other things that you would like to hear Shae talk about. Please message me back directly so that we can set up a time to talk with Shae again and get some more information about the next project you're working on.